everyone. I am Priya Rao with Grapevine Magazine, and I'm here with two of my lovely friends who are going to give us some information on how to start your vegetable garden early this year. For all of you who don't do seedings and all that stuff, I don't know if that's a technical term, but that's what I call it. We're going to get advice from the experts here. Please meet Derek and Venice Barber. I love these guys. They are such lovely people. They've got one of their doggies who they rescue here. They always work with older and disabled dogs. Anyways, that's an aside. But they have a fabulous program called Homestead TO. You've read about it in the magazine, and now we're going to give you a little bit of hands-on practical information on how to start your seedlings. I think seedlings is the correct term, isn't it, Venice?
Yes. Definitely.
Thank you. I missed the L in the first time. Tell us a little bit about the program. I know it's too late for people to sign up now for the in-person and maybe even for the online, but just in terms of what the program does and how long it goes.
Yeah, Homestead TO is a social enterprise based in Toronto, and our purpose is to give people the confidence and knowledge to grow their own food at home or in their local community garden. So we have a 7-month in-person program where it's very hands-on. They're growing alongside us, and they get to share in the harvest, which is one of the best parts of the program. And then we also have a 14-week online program for people who don't want to meet in person or who can't get to Downsview Park. Mm-hmm. And so they can learn at their own pace at home and ask questions, as many questions as they want. Derek can answer gardening questions forever. And just grow along with us and learn with us and grow food, which is amazing.
Yeah, which so many people have been gravitating towards, especially the last couple of years during, lockdown and everything. We've been trying to make use of our times, and a lot of us are turning to gardening. And as you can see, we are powered by plants here. So we're going to get some practical tips on how to start these seedlings, because I've never done that. I'm one of those people who always just goes to the vegetable market and picks up the fully grown plants that I then have to just put into my garden. Why is that not the best thing to do?
The fully grown plants, those are fine. It's certainly a lot easier, and you save a lot of indoor space. I know one of the big problems that a lot of people have are just starting plants indoors. Who's got space in their countertops? Who's got the right lights, like that perfect southwest facing window and whatnot? But the downside of that is you're limited to the basics. Whatever tomatoes they've got are what you have.
Yeah.
And the other downside is you're paying several dollars per seedling as opposed to several pennies per seed. So there's a financial element of that as well. So I like starting them indoors. So we try to make room. Sometimes we have to take over desks and countertops and whatnot, but we make it work. And then we've got access to hundreds of different seedling varieties of even just tomatoes. So we can grow anything that we want. We can try new things every year. It's definitely a lot easier and cheaper.
Amazing, and that's what we're all looking for too. Of course, the beauty of growing your own food is it tastes so much better, especially tomatoes. Those are the best thing to grow, so that's what we're going to demonstrate here. But also, I love the fact that you're saving so much when you do it, when you start really from the basic seed. Yep. I mean, I spend probably $60 to $70, probably more, on plants a year, and a lot of them don't ever grow. But that's because my soil, I guess I don't really know what is proper to grow in my soil. Tomatoes do grow, but I've had mixed bag results with some of the other items. So maybe we'll talk about that and how to learn, what's good to grow in your soil. We'll talk about that a little later, but right now, we're going to move on to some show and tell. All right, folks, so here we are. We've got our, what do you call this guy?
It's a seedling tray. There's two
seedling
parts.
tray.
You got the tray that keeps everything clean and off your countertops, and you've got what are called seedling cells, or cell pack, that holds all of the individual plants.
Now, you can get fancy with some other gadgetry, but we decided to keep things simple for people like me who are familiar with this, because you see these in every garden center, and because all the work is done for you, right? You've got the tray that will hold all the water runoff, and then you've got the pre-packaged, pre-sized little cells here. Okay, so how do we start?
Well, there's basically really only two things that seeds need to actually germinate. So it's really easy at the seeding or seed germination stage.
Okay.
They need the right level of warmth, which is essentially why all seedling trays are black. They get energy from the sun, They warm up the soil a little bit, which prompts the seeds to germinate. And they need moisture. So it's very, very easy to start seeds, and then it gets a little more complicated actually growing the seedling, but we can talk about that afterwards.
Okay.
There's only 2 ingredients we're going to use to start the seeds, other than the seeds themselves. You need some sort of a seed starting mix. So we use this one. It's from a local company just outside of Hamilton. And all it is, it's just, it's kind of ground up peat moss, coir, and vermiculite. And that is just something, it's really good at retaining water, which is a primary role of a seed starting mix. The other thing you'll need is the water itself.
Okay.
So one little secret is don't pour the seed starting mix straight into the tray and then put water on, because it's hard to get that exact right level of dampness.
Okay. That's exactly what I would have done.
Yeah, and that's how I started. I would basically, even worse, I would basically pour the seed starting mix into here, put the seed in, and then water it. And then all the seeds would float to the top.
Oh, okay.
And I'd be wondering why I got low germination rates. So we like to pre-mix everything.
So basically everything I thought, the steps that I thought are exactly wrong.
Yeah, I mean, you then leave things to circumstance when you do that. It depends on how high the seed floats. If it's got to be under the soil a little bit in order to have moisture.
Okay.
So we pre-mix it. So all we do is essentially pour the seed starting mix into a bucket. Fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
We'll just do this.
Time to get your hands dirty here.
Yeah, it was gonna happen.
Okay.
This is all right. That's good enough. And then we add water to that mixture.
Okay.
So the key is,
So we've got about that much in there. How much water are we going to put in?
it's one of those where it's just enough to get it to the right level of dampness, and I'll show you the test on that.
Okay.
So the key is something like this, coir and peat moss. Something like this is it's like a sponge, where when you first put water on a sponge, it basically runs off, and you have to kind of activate it. So you usually have to pour it a little bit in, mix it up, and this is called just activating the peat moss. And then,
it's like when you're making a cake and you got to mix the liquids into the flours. That's what you're doing.
yeah, and there's no exact recipe. Like a cake, you often get the benefit of a recipe. This is different because all the different seed starters some of them are pre-moistened, some of them aren't. Some of them, you can tell by the weight of the bag. But you know when you've got it done because you get the right texture. Actually, this feels pretty good. What you want to do is you want to be able to, first of all, pick it up without it dropping. It can't be sopping wet. But then you should be able to make a snowball, just something like that. This basically, it holds together. There's no huge air pockets in it or anything like that. This is perfect. Then you've got your mixture. So now it's a case of putting it in your seed tray. And all you do is just pour it on top. This is where you get your hands dirty.
Okay.
But it's worth it. Because this is where you get the mixture right. You just pour it in.
And like I said, we're going to start with tomatoes here because everybody loves growing tomatoes. I don't know anybody who doesn't put tomatoes in their garden.
Yeah, so we'll just do a small kind of sample here. But here is the trick. So everything looks perfect.
Okay.
It's at the right level, but then what you've got is a whole lot of air pockets in here. Those air pockets are fine in real soil. We've got kind of established root systems, but in something like this, where we're basically planting just seeds into here that are going to be super delicate, it's going to send out one root. If the root hits an air pocket and dries up, it may not make it. So just tamp it just a little bit. You wouldn't do this with garden soil, but with this particular mix, there's no clay, there's nothing to actually firm up too much so that the seed can't penetrate it. So you can basically tamp it down a little bit and then top it up again with a little bit more. Get it just below the lip of the cell pack. And then you've created your home for your seeds. Next, you have to know how deep to plant the seedlings.
Right.
There's a couple of different ways to do this. There's a few very, very small rooted seeds or seedlings where you can just do what's called broadcasting the seeds. And that is basically just kind of putting a few seeds on top and pressing them into the soil. And that's what you do with onions. It's what you do with lettuce. and arugula, and not too much else. Really, just those of the major vegetables that we grow a lot of. For most vegetables or vegetable seeds, you have to actually put them in the soil and bury it just a little bit. And the rule of thumb is you look at the size of the seed. If it's a big seed, and picture like a pumpkin seed or a cucumber seed or something like that, you would bury it to about 2 times the width of the seed.
The width, not the height.
Exactly, the
Okay.
width. So on something like a pumpkin seed, where you got, what is that, about half a centimeter, you would go to a little over 1 centimeter deep.
Okay.
But for the most other seeds, you want to go, they're a lot smaller, and you want to bury it to 4 times the width of the seed. So picture a tomato seed, you're looking at maybe 1 millimeter, so you're going to bury it about 4 millimeters. And this is a process called dibbling. You can actually get a dibbler when you're doing it on a large scale. You can use a chopstick. I just do that.
Right.
Nothing fancy
Easy
about
enough.
it. And you go down just about 4 millimeters or so in this case, because we're using just a small tomato-sized seed. And this gives you something to plant into. And then you have to wash your hands, of course, before you handle the seeds. And then we'll start putting seeds in.
Why do you have to wash your hands before handling the seeds?
Just because what I'm going to do is I'm going to put all the seeds in this one hand, and then I don't want to be picking up soil. Plus they'll stick together if my hands must.
Okay.
So
All
it
right.
just makes it a lot easier.
So we'll do that and we'll be right back. Okay, so now we are going to put these seeds into our, what do we call these little?
The cells.
The
seedling
cells, but when we've made our little...
Oh, dibbles.
The dibbles. We've made our little dibbles with your finger, remember that? And so now we've got the seeds, and Venice is going to start seeding while Derek tells us exactly what's happening.
Yeah. So what we do, we've got our kind of preset holes or dibbles that are in the cell trays. They are set to the right depth, and all we have to do is put ideally 1 seed in each. If you're really tight for time and you're not going to have time to do any reseeding, or if you don't know if your seeds are good, let's say they're really old or something, then I'd say put 2 seeds in per cell.
Okay.
And the benefit of that is at least one of them will germinate.
Right.
You can bet that every cell is going to have something that germinates, and then you just go through, and where both of them happen to germinate, you just kind of use your thumbnail or a pair of scissors and just take out the weaker one. But for us, these are first-year seeds, so I'm just going to put 1 in each one.
All right.
So we got 1 seed
So that's
per
it,
cell.
right? You've got the seeds in there and that's it. We're done.
Yep, except we got to make
Oh.
sure they don't dry out.
Okay.
And so what we do is, right now they're in the dibble. We have to close the hole, if you will, and essentially bury the seed.
So you're just pinching some soil on top?
Yeah. What you
Got it.
don't want to do, you don't want to kind of mound a lot of soil on top, because then what you're effectively doing is burying it, which it should still germinate, but it's going to take longer when it's not at the right depth.
Okay.
And also, if you don't pinch it at all and the seed is just sitting on the top, it might germinate, but it might dry out. It's harder to control the moisture level on the top of the soil versus within the soil. It's much easier. So you just kind of pinch each dibble closed, tap it a little bit just to push out any air pockets that you made, and then it's officially planted.
Great. Now, I know you were talking about putting something on top of this. Like a lot of people would normally put one of those plastic domes on top to make their own little, I guess, little sun
Little mini greenhouse in effect.
Yeah.
What those are called, those are humidity domes. And the purpose of that is it's not to hold in the heat or to hold in the sunlight or anything like that. It's to hold in the moisture. And to just make sure that what's damp right now stays damp. Because remember, the seeds need heat, and usually room temperature is right, but just it can't get too cold, and it needs moisture. So these have to stay damp. The problem with the humidity domes is if not all seedlings germinate at the same time, if some germinate, and when I say germinate, I mean the leaves come out.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They sprout. At that stage, they don't just need moisture and warmth. They also need a little bit of oxygen, and they need light.
Right.
So suddenly that humidity dome that was doing a lot of wonderful things at the beginning, it's now starting to block some of the light. It's not very good at letting light in. In fact, it deflects a lot of the light, especially if it's kind of misted on the inside.
Yeah.
So a good alternative is using something called vermiculite. And this vermiculite, you see it in a lot of potting mixes and whatnot. It's just a super lightweight soil. This is literally a rock that's been heated to about, I think it's about 1600 degrees Fahrenheit, and it literally puffs up. It's like popcorn, and it does a couple of different things. It becomes incredibly lightweight, and it's basically used for, if it's in the soil, it's used to just create air pockets and create kind of lightweight soil. But if you put it on top of the soil, what it's doing is it's covering up in the most lightweight manner possible. It's covering up the soil itself so that there's less evaporation. And we're using it to just maintain moisture. in the soil. And by doing this, a new seedling will have no trouble punching its way through this. This is incredibly lightweight. But those seedlings that haven't yet germinated, that are still just in seed form, the seeds will still be covered. They're still the soil will stay damp. Whereas those that do start to leaf out, that have germinated, the leaves will just push above here and they'll have access to full sunlight.
So this is like, if you're a baker, you know, think of a crumble on top of your like apple crisp or something. You're just going to layer a nice even layer, but not too thick, of your crumble on top of your little seedlings here to protect them. The one thing I want to ask you about that dome was that, can that also lead to fungus?
It can, in the sense of it lacks airflow. It's not just, the way it actually prevents evaporation is it keeps the moisture in, but it also creates a lot of dead air. So if there's any fungus that is in your seed starting mix, which there usually isn't in seed starting mix, but there almost always is in potting mix, which is just basically seed starting mix with a little bit of compost built into it, then you're suddenly at risk for things like damping off, for things like powdery mildew, or for things like mold. So basically it becomes a risk if you leave that on too long. Usually if the seeds germinate quickly and you're able to take the dome off, it's not so bad. But it's just a risk that, again, using vermiculite just reduces that risk.
Okay, great. So what do we do now with this ready-made? Our seeds are done. How do we get them to planting stage?
Well, now it's easy. Now we wait. We've basically set the seeds up for success. And remember, the seeds to germinate they just need the warmth. So keep this room temperature or slightly above, but not too warm, of course. And we just keep an eye on the moisture. So essentially, you can just kind of feel to the side. If ever the soil feels really dry, if it ever looks like it's dried out, or if ever it's really lightweight, you get really good at telling by just the weight of it by lifting it up. Then add a little bit of moisture.
Okay.
And usually when you add moisture, the temptation is just going to be to pour it on top. But then what you can do, if there's any seeds that have just germinated and they're just starting to spread up, there's a risk that you'll crush it. Plus you tend to move things around.
Yeah.
So what I would say, the advantage of these, lift it up and water from beneath. As long as it doesn't completely dry out, the water will be able to percolate up from the bottom. If it dries out, then in that circumstance, then you should probably water from the top. But don't let it dry out, and we'll do that. And that's all it needs for the time being. But after, as little as 4 days, depending on what you're planting, tomatoes are usually about 4, 5, 6 days, they'll germinate, and you'll see the first 2 leaves that'll come up. At that stage, then it needs sunlight. So then we want to put this in full light. It doesn't have to be in light right now. You can put it anywhere you'd like. But somewhere where you've got easy ability to check on it, and somewhere where it's not going to get too hot or too cold, and you're good. But those leaves tell you need light. It needs to photosynthesize. So then put it by a window. Remember
that from high school biology, photosynthesis.
Yeah. That's how, amazingly, that's what is the most amazing thing about plants. Photosynthesis is how they feed themselves. The output of photosynthesis is glucose. And that's basically 95% of everything a plant needs is in that. It's phenomenal, and we just have to cover the other 5% as gardeners, just different nutrients and fertilizers and whatnot. So photosynthesis is a great process, but it needs sunlight to do it.
Okay.
So we then have to put this by a window or under a grow light or both. One of the secrets, though, if you put it by a window, what you're doing is all the light is coming from one side. So naturally the plant is going to grow towards the light.
Right.
So rotate. Every day if you're putting it by a window. The perfect scenario is you have a window on one side if it's indoors, and then a grow light on the other side. And then it basically, you're going to see straight seedlings at that point. It makes your life a lot easier as well as the plants.
So how long will it take for these seedlings to become seedlings that we would plant?
For things like these tomatoes, it's going to take about 6 weeks. That's all it takes. So these will be ready you do this in early April, these are ready by mid-May. And then you can transplant them outside. Before you transplant them outside, you go through a process called hardening them off, which is getting them used to outdoor temperatures and outdoor wind and outdoor direct sunlight.
Okay.
Because these are not going to be used to it indoors. They're comfortable. It's typically...
They've had a sheltered life so far.
Yes. It's a gentle light. Even if you've got it beside a bright sunny window, the window is filtering out most of the UV rays. So basically it's got a gentle light. There's there's no direct sunlight. There's no wind for the most part. No temperature variation. and then you transplant it outside, if it, just kind of without training it or getting it used to those
It's
conditions.
harsh reality.
Yes.
Harsh, yeah.
And that's where the plant tends to look kind of beaten up a little bit at first. It can actually get sun scalded. If you put it out on a bright sunny day, you'll
Like a
see white
sunburn?
spots on it. Yep. Except it's just kind of white blotches on the plant.
So does that mean you take the whole thing out and keep it outside for short durations?
Yeah, so maybe a
Okay.
week before. So watch the forecast in May. And May being when you typically put tomatoes out. Watch the forecast, and then when things start to look pretty good a couple weeks out, and you're going to you want to transplant it into your garden. Then you got to kind of plan ahead and start training the plant. So maybe about a week before you want to put it outside for good, put it outside for an hour. And put it in a spot where it's not going to get too much light, like let's say morning light, where it's not too windy, and just gently get it used to being outside in those conditions, and then bring it back in. And the next day, put it out for 2 hours. And then what you're doing is you're basically just kind of helping the plant get used to everything it's going to have to deal with when it's outdoors full time.
Amazing. You got to take care of these little guys, folks, and then they will reward you with so much bounty at the end of the season. You'll be grateful for it. Thank you, Venice and Derek, so much for giving us this little tutorial, and we'll just check in with these seedlings maybe along the path to being ready for planting. Happy gardening, everyone!